Hi there, this is Solitary Runes from Solitary Rune Films, and welcome to our neglected gem. Today it's another film from the 90s, another film released by Imprint, and it's Philip Haas's The Music of Chance from 1993, starring James Spader, Mandy Patinkin, Joel Grey, Charles Durning, Emmett Walsh, Samantha Mathis and Christopher Penn. This is, again, one of those films that just had a bare bones DVD, and I was so happy that it got a Blu-ray release. And Imprint have done another wonderful job with the extras, which I'll get to in a little while. Philip Haas mainly did documentaries. This was his first theatrical feature. He and Belinda Haas wrote the script based on a Paul Auster novel, and Paul Auster has a cameo in the film as well. Haas would then do Angels and Insects 2 years later, but then he hasn't really done that much as far as feature films since. The reason I love The Music of Chance is because there's lots of whys that don't get answered. You know, we're so used to, especially in American cinema, of every single why and if being answered, being signposted, being told to us in explicit detail. But the great thing about The Music of Chance is there's lots of whys that just aren't explained, which is wonderful. So the film starts with Mandy Patinkin driving down a road, controversially, and he comes across this character played by James Spader, who tries to run away from the car and falls over, and he's in pretty bad shape. It's obvious he's been beaten up. And he asks him whether he can help him and give him a lift. So they both head to New York, and on the way James Spader tells him this story about how he was in a big poker game, and he was winning, and then guys broke in, robbed the game, and then the people at the game, because he was an outsider, figured that he was involved, and obviously started beating him up. To which Mandy Patinkin answers, "Did you set them up?" Which obviously James Spader is incredulous. How dare you suggest that? So Patinkin, his character is called Jim Nash, takes Jack, James Spader's character. He's about to just leave him in the subway in New York, and then he asks him, is he interested in a proposition? They get a hotel room. No, not that kind of proposition. Or is it? And he asks Spader, because Spader also says he's due to play in a big game, but he needs 10 grand in a couple of days. And Patinkin is like, well, I might know somebody that might front you the 10 grand. Do you expect to win? What would the split be on the winnings? So again, Jack tells him, oh yeah, it's an easy mark. He won money from these two rich guys before, so it's easy money, but he needs the 10 grand. So Nash agrees. So they go to this big mansion in Pennsylvania, and we meet the characters of Flower and Stone, played by the wonderful Charles Durning and the wonderful Joel Grey. And they were introduced to them. They tell the story of how they got rich, we go upstairs, and Stone has built this little model city of the world where he has put himself in different ages of himself, and it seems like a fun little hobby to rebuild the world in a city of his own making. But as the film progresses, we perhaps see little details that are a little bit darker. James Spader is fantastic in this scene, as he's just kind of bewildered and just wants to get on with the cards. But it really sets up these two characters because they're just so rich. You know, they talk about how they became rich and then they became fabulously rich. So we get down to the game of poker, and predictably Jack is up 27 grand, and then Nash decides to go to the bathroom for a break, but he goes back to the city of the world to have another look, and obviously the lights are out, so it's a bit darker, and he kind of sees little more sinister details in the city of the world. And then he does something. He comes back, and Jack is suddenly in trouble, and he's lost a couple of big hands, and all of a sudden their 27 grand has been whittled down. And I don't think there's any spoilers, but they end up losing all their money. Nash then puts his car up for collateral, and then they end up losing that. And of course they're like, well, we'll do an IOU and we'll pay the money back. But Flower and Stone aren't interested in that. They then do one cut for the cards to see if they can get the car back, or they double their debt, and unsurprisingly they end up doubling their debt. So the two men who have recently purchased a 15th century Irish castle, which has 10,000 stones in this field on their property, they come up with the idea that Jack and Jim can pay off their debt by building a wall out of this castle in the middle of a field, and they'll pay them an hourly wage. Then after 50 days they'll have paid off their debt, and that's essentially the plot of the film. So if people are wanting an action-packed thrill ride, this isn't the film. You can kind of see why it wasn't popular. Again, there's lots of whys that aren't talked about. So they get out to the field. There's a trailer there for them to stay. They can get food and whatever they wish. And that is managed by the wonderful Emmett Walsh, the national treasure that is Emmett Walsh. And even his voice, that drawl, it kind of antagonises them, and he doesn't help, he's just there to watch. And we just follow Jack and Jim as they try and pay off their debt by building this wall in the middle of a field that has no real purpose. And again, things happen, not necessarily the things that normal narrative films would happen, and again, there's no explanation for certain things, which might frustrate some people, but it's the element of the film that I absolutely adore. And again, that's as far as I'll take the plot. The film is just so wonderful because it's just off. The score has some jazz, it starts with some opera, there's some ragtime, but there's also just kind of almost discordant music, and again it's just a little off, which suits the tone of the film. Patinkin is kind of the fatherly figure to James Spader. He's the one that wants to stay, pay off the debt. Obviously, Spader's first reaction is to get out of here. Spader, this might be his best performance, certainly right up there with Crash, for example, but it's completely opposite of Crash. That was a very internal, controlled performance. This, he's very squirrely. He has a kind of thick accent. The first time you watch the film, you might think he's doing a bit too much. He's got lots of tics and but he's just so good. Patinkin, like I say, is kind of the more grounded character. He puts on a nice Boston accent. Scorsese should have maybe hired him into The Departed to actually do a authentic Boston accent, but low-hanging fruit. But the problem with low-hanging fruit is it's so tasty. And their relationship, because again, Jack, the Spader character, is the more volatile one. He's always given sass to Emmett Walsh, who again, just by his nature, does wind him up a bit. He punches Emmett Walsh at one point. But Spader, everybody's fantastic. Charles Durning and Joel Grey are wonderful as these two odd or eccentric billionaires, as billionaires do tend to be. Charles Durning, of course, is jovial, but then when the kind of tone changes, Durning can do that kind of sinister, threatening stuff. And Joel Grey can be sinister even when he's kind of peppy and kind of upbeat. He can still do like sinister. The film starts and kind of ends in a nice loop, and again you have this kind of existential, here's two guys paying off their debt by building a wall in the middle of a field that doesn't connect to anything. It doesn't really have a practical purpose, but again, it's all to do with the power and the rich, and obviously they sign the contracts at the start, but obviously terms change, things change, not for the best. It's just so good. It's only about 98 minutes long. It just moves at its own leisurely pace, but it's like over and done with pretty quickly, because it is a strange little world that once you're in it, it just kind of flies by. Again, the imprint release is wonderful. I do love the alternate artwork, kind of sums up the film perfectly. I really do like the alternate artwork. And again, you kind of get, there's Durning and Spader in the city of the world, and you can kind of see Spader's reaction to the whole thing as they're talking about how they became rich, and again, it's all about the winning numbers in the lottery they went for were prime numbers. And there's lots of references to numbers and figures and destiny and chance. As Jack and Nash are building the wall, there's occasional inserts of what we assume is Joel Grey's white gloved hand in his city of the world, putting the trailer down in the field, making a little model of the wall in the field. Joel Grey's character talks about building the house and part of his model as well, including a room that also has the city of the world in it, so you'd have to do a miniature city of the world for the city of the world. It's just lots of lovely little odd details. Again, the release is a 1080 print. Again, it doesn't look amazing, but the actual the film does have that kind of almost a little bit too bright look. It has again, even the cinematography is a little strange, which again really suits the film. There's a commentary by film critic A.S. Hamra from 2022. I'm not really familiar with that critic. Chance and Destiny, a video essay by film scholar Adrian Martin and film critic Christina Alvarez Lopez from 2022, which is excellent. And then two real little short gems, A Character at a Time, an interview with actor Joel Grey from 2022, and Defining the Character, an interview with Emmett Walsh from 2022, which is absolute gold, because again, Emmett Walsh is like a national treasure. He's absolutely fantastic. And then we've got music for Misguided Tasks, an interview with composer Philip Johnson from 2022, who talks about the odd kind of mix in the score. Again, he talks also about he got a group of musicians together to do a kind of atonal, what he says, hillbilly music, which ended up not being used for like the last third. The last third's fairly score free. But that's an interesting little extra as well. And you also get the trailer, which again, I'm not really a big fan of trailers because they do tend to, well, apart from anything else, show you stuff from the film. But the trailer makes this sound like, you know, an adrenaline fueled thriller, and of course it's not that, which again might be one of the reasons why it pretty much disappeared from Trace. Again, it's not going to be to everybody's taste. I think you have to have a certain sense of, not necessarily humour, but a certain prerequisite for oddness to really like it. But I absolutely love it. Again, it's another gem from outside the Hollywood system in the 90s. Also, I did a neglected gem on Carl Franklin's masterpiece, One False Move, also by Imprint. But Music a Chance is another one from 1993, an absolute gem that might be up your alley and it might not be. Great performances, and just an odd little story. Again, Patinkin's character has just spent, you know, the last year or so just driving around America. He's an ex-fireman whose father left him some money, so he just drove around America, which just confuses James Spader because he's just like, why? But again, there's no reason. And again, that's one of the main attractions for me to the film, is the fact there's whys that just don't get answered, there's ifs that don't get answered because it doesn't really matter. So thanks very much for watching this neglected gem. Please let me know if you've seen the Music a Chance and what you think of it, and hopefully you'll join me again for more neglected gems at some point, because there's always some more neglected gems. So thanks very much for watching. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.